Today we're going to start our study of human anatomy with some introduction to anatomy, and then we're going to talk about the different ways that we can study anatomy. So first of all, anatomy is the study of structures. And every time we talk about a structure, we're going to talk about what that thing is, what it's shaped like, what it's made of, and the real basics of what it does. When we get more detail into what it does, that is physiology. So in this class, we're just going to talk about what things do, just enough so that we can understand what they are, because form and function, of course, always go together. So let's start off with the main difference that we're going to talk about, and that is microscopic anatomy versus gross anatomy. Microscopic anatomy is the structures that cannot be seen with the naked eye. So we need to use a microscope, hence microscopic. And we can see a lot of really cool things when we do microscopic study, such as we can see individual cells of different shapes and sizes. So we've got some big cells here, and you can see that there's one nucleus for each of these. These are big and look kind of empty. And then around them, we see other areas that are very different. These are different tissues. This one, by the way, is adipose. That's fat. I know, it looks like fat, doesn't it? So that's microscopic. We can tell a lot about structures, about the health of a person, by studying the microscopy. Gross anatomy is anything that is large enough to be seen with the naked eye. This is a picture of the bones of the wrist. These are the bones that make up the palm here, and these are all your wrist bones, which we call the carpals. So this is an example of gross anatomy. And in gross anatomy, we talk about not just the big things like whole bones, but also all of the little bumps and indentations on those bones and what their function is. Now we can also talk about comparative anatomy, which is not something we're going to do a lot of in this class, although I will talk about it sometimes because I find it fascinating. Comparative anatomy is where we're examining the similarities and differences in the anatomy of different species. And there are a lot of similarities because so many organisms have common evolutionary ancestors, which is another theme we're going to talk about a lot in this class. So these are skeletal hands of all of these primates, and these are what their hands look like with all of the tissues on them. And you can see that all of these hands look really similar to the human hand, even though once they've got the skin on them, they look different, although the macaque hand looks a lot very similar to the human hand. And we can tell a lot about the lifestyle of an organism by the way that its skeleton is shaped. So human hands are very good for grasping and carrying things. But because we don't spend a lot of time swinging through trees, we don't see the elongated fingers and reduced thumbs that we see in some of the primates that swing through trees. And we can see that in the skeleton, even though all of these hands have the same essential organization of bones, that being a group of small carpals, next to those long, thin metacarpals, and then phalange bones making up the digits. And you can see in the fingers 2 through 5, 3 phalange bones, in the thumb 2 phalange bones. All the same regardless. Developmental anatomy looks at the changes from the moment of conception through maturity. Embryology is similar, is a subset of developmental anatomy that just looks at development before birth. So these stages shown here of development would be part of the study of embryology. After birth, that would then be developmental anatomy, but no longer embryology. So you can see that day 1, the human starts out as a single cell. This is a much zoomed in version of it. And then it starts to replicate, taking on a more complex shape. Starting out with as it develops, a tail, the limbs develop as little buds, and then the eyes slowly develop, and then slowly the fingers and toes separate. The head becomes more distinguishable, and you can see things start to appear like ears. So this is developmental anatomy, specifically embryology. Now we can also talk about regional anatomy. That is the structures of a particular part of the body. So we're going to talk about the skin, we're going to talk about the bones, but we're also going to talk about the structure of the arm, the structures of the head. We can talk about surface anatomy, which are all the superficial anatomic markings and how those are created by the structures underneath them. So we're going to talk a lot about what, for example, muscles you can see from the superficial, and then what are deep to those and need to be, we need to take away the tissues to see other muscles. That'll make a little more sense in a minute. We are going to organize this class by systemic anatomy. That is, we're going to study each system of the body separately. So we're going to talk about the digestive system and the urinary system. We're going to start, the first system we're going to talk about is actually the integumentary system, which is your skin. So that's our different approaches to anatomy. And then next up, we're going to start learning about the different terms that we need to talk about so that we can all make sure that we're talking about anatomy in the same way.